Hi, I'm Jeff, and welcome to another video where I give you the opportunity to test your comic book grading skills up against actual results from CGC. Now, this is another one of my Reacts videos. The first one of my Reacts videos was to CGC's initial video that they put out through their channel here on YouTube, Grading Comic Books #1. If you haven't seen that Reacts video, I highly recommend that you click that thing right up there and watch that one. We're going to be building on the information from that first video in this video. Now, whereas this first video that came out that we did our Reacts video to was focused on grading alone, this second video, although it has elements of grading inside of it, is mostly focused on restoration. Now, I will admit, restoration is not a topic that I know a ton about. Actually, in fact, I know very little about it. I've tried to learn as much as I possibly could about grading, and I feel like I have a pretty good handle on that. You know, I still have a lot to learn, but restoration, I definitely still have a lot to learn. But as always, as I'm learning, I like to take you all along on the journey with me. These videos that CGC are making are fantastic resources for information, but I'm still doing these Reacts videos because I feel like there is still some room to add some additional information and to potentially clarify or put a spotlight on some of the points that they mention in this video. Okay, without further ado, let's go ahead and start the video and see what I have to say about it, okay? This video is hosted by Matt Nelson, who hosted the first video as well. He is a primary grader at CGC and a good guy.
Hi, my name's Matt Nelson, primary grader at CGC. In today's CGC Insider grading video, I'm going to be grading a Golden Age comic book that has restoration. The comic we're grading is Superman 14, which features a classic patriotic cover by Fred Ray, published by DC in 1942. Very popular among collectors and very hard to find in high grade because of its black cover. After going through our grading process...
Okay, so he is about to tell you what grade he gave the book. Now, what I like to do in these videos is to hide that information from you so that as he assesses the book, you can also assess the book as well and kind of think to yourself, what kind of grade would I give this book? Now, I tried to do this in my very first video, and I didn't realize until after hundreds of people had watched the video that I covered up the grade, but I had dropped out the audio for when he verbalized the grade, but somehow it made it into the final version that's now on YouTube. So yeah, it's a little bit less fun, but if you go back and you watch that original video, if you haven't watched it already, when he goes to reveal the grade after I stop it and say, I'm gonna hide the grade, go la 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 la, so you don't hear it, so you can have a little bit of the fun of trying to guess the grade yourself. Hopefully I'll get it right in this one. But once again, this video is not primarily about grading, but I still want to keep that element of it in there. This is, after all, a test your comic book grading skills video. Okay, let's continue.
We have arrived at a for this copy of Superman 14. As you can see, the label is purple, which indicates restoration on this comic book. CGC's restoration scale is broken down into two categories, quantity and quality. The quantity ranges from 1 through 5. Okay,
so as he just says, the scale is broken down into two areas, quality and quantity. He's going to start by looking at quantity scale and then look at the quality scale. Now, when I was preparing for this video, I started looking at this information so that I could have a pretty decent grip on it. And as I was going through this page that we've stopped on right here, I realized that the information for number 3, moderate quantity, was the exact same for number 4, moderate/extensive quantity of restoration. I thought, that's really weird. So I started doing some research on the CGC website that led me to this page right here. Now, I'm going to put a link down in the description so that you can also hit the link to go to this page. I definitely recommend that maybe even you stop the video right now and come back to it, but at least at some point you go to this page, hit the link, go to this page, hit that little click here, right here. It's going to take you to this, which is basically like a restoration guide handout that CGC has created. It actually is a pretty good resource, and I recommend at the very least familiarizing yourself with all the information here. A lot of this, especially things like what they consider to be on the quality scale, like professional restoration materials or unprofessional restoration materials, could impact this restoration grade a lot. So it's good to have a sense of what they mean in terms of quality and quantity specifically. He doesn't go over it specifically in this video, but like I said, it's just good for you to have a general, a bit of knowledge on it. And you'll see down here, like I said, I stopped the video. I looked down here at the quantity scale, and yes, here on this sheet here, number 3 and number 4 do have different information than it did on the video. So it's good to not focus on the information in the video that they provided and more focus on what is on this sheet. I'll also just quickly point out that you'll see at the bottom of that second page the conservation label. We're going to get back to that in just a moment, but keep in mind that there is, in fact, a conservation label as well. Okay, let's continue.
With 1 being slight restoration and 5 being extensive, and the quality scale is A, B, or C, with A being professional work and C being amateur. When dealing with multiple types of restoration on a book, the highest quantity and the lowest quality are used to arrive at the cumulative restoration grade.
Okay, so this is stuff that you need to keep in mind when you are considering buying a restored book. As when a 9.0, is more desirable than a 5.0, for example. I would say that a book, if you're looking at a book with restoration, you're going to want a book that has less restoration in it than more restoration in it. And something that you want to keep in mind is that you want to have, a higher grade. You want to have a grade closer to the A1 and not in the C5 category, if you can help it, Let's continue.
The highest rating given to a restored comic is A1, and the lowest is C5.
Okay, so like I was just saying, you want the A1, you don't want the C5. And just so you know, I mentioned previously the conservation label. The conservation label only goes to books that have an A1 score. It's a very specific, section of the restored grade potential. Frankly, a conserved book triggers me a little bit. What it means is that they did very little restoration and they used professional restoration materials. Now, the A part of that, I understand, using the professional materials. The one part of it, if you have just a tiny bit of need for restoration, in my opinion, don't do it. Don't do it. Take the hit on the grade. If you have a little bit of color breaking something and you're like, oh, I'm just going to do a little bit of color touch. It'll make it look so much nicer with just a little bit of color touch. Boom. Now you're either going to get a conserved or a label or a restoration label. It is going to hurt your value on your book significantly. okay? You would be better off just taking the hit in the grade rather than doing a minor amount of restoration. Now, if you're doing it for your own personal collection and you just like, I just want the nicest book possible, I just want it to look as nice as possible, have the best grade possible, I don't care about resale value, I just want it for the PC, hey man, you do what makes you happy. Absolutely. But if you've got resale at all in mind, I would only do any kind of restoration is if like it needs it. If it just, if it's falling apart and that without it, it's just a mess, which I don't think is in very many instances. But it's just something to keep in mind. I think it's the reason why, I don't see a lot of restored labels because I think people at this point have realized, hey man, getting a restored label is not a good idea because it hurts my value too significantly. And I definitely don't see a lot of those conservation labels because why would you do a minimum amount of restoration if it wasn't strictly necessary? Why would you do any at all? Anyways, rant over. Let's continue.
It's very important to start with a clean workspace that's clear of any clutter, food, or drink. It's also equally important to have good lighting and also good magnification, and to make sure that your hands are clean and dry before you touch the comic book.
Okay, so we talked about grading in our first video, in my first Reacts video to CGC's original grading comic books #1. So we're not going to get into too much detail here, but I'll just remind everybody, people sometimes still think that gloves is the way to go. I am with Matt on this one. Do not use gloves. It definitely, you need your sense of touch, not only to check for restoration in his instance, but also just like you're handling something very fragile. It desensitizes your fingers to be wearing gloves, and you want to have full tactile sensation so that you don't accidentally mishandle something as fragile as a comic book. Just wash your hands and make sure they're dry. Every time that I read any comic book, even if it's valuable, if I'm assessing a valuable book, or if I'm just reading something that I picked up this week that I know is never going to have any value, I always wash my hands and make sure they're clean and dry. Also, on the point of magnification, I just want to remind everybody that not everybody has a magnifying glass. You can get them for pretty cheap, and so you maybe might want to consider getting one, but it is not strictly necessary. As a hack to a magnifying glass, I often use my phone's camera. I take a picture of it, making sure that my picture is 100% in focus, and then I use that picture and I blow it up. And it can be a fantastic way to magnify things on a comic book. You can even do it with a video if you want to scroll by and make sure that you got the light just right at one point. So there's lots of great opportunity to use your phone as a magnifying glass. Okay, let's continue.
Now to get a first impression of this comic.
Okay, so I'm stopping again real fast because I don't feel like I can overstate the importance of the first impression of the comics. Matt right now is getting into the process that he went over in the first grading comic books video. If he's going to go down the list of things that he does when he grades, and he starts with his first impression. It's part of the reason why I feel that every book that could possibly, even minorly, benefit from pressing should get a press, because there's a big difference between a nice, flat, clean, perfect looking book when you're a grader and you look at it and your first impression is, this book looks really good. This might be a 9.8, rather than, ooh, oh yeah, I see a flaw right away there. This isn't a 9.8. Like, starting with that higher expectation for the book is going to influence, in my opinion, the overall grade that you end up getting, regardless if you get that 9.8. I still think that first impression is an important part of the grading process. So make sure that you present your book in the best possible way, and oftentimes I think that's through getting a press. Let's continue.
So glancing at this book, I noticed it appears to be a mid-grade copy. There's some wear along the edges and along the spine, particularly at the staples, which still seem to be fairly intact. Flipping it over, I see some wear along the spine and also across the top edge of the back cover, but still not too bad. And glancing at the interior pages, they appear to be high quality and there are no signs of brittleness. The next step, a critical step, is to confirm the completeness of this comic book by counting its pages.
Okay, so once again, this is the section of the grading process where he counts the pages. This is something that we saw in the original video that I made and talked about, and he's going to be doing it here with this book as he would with every single book, regardless of whether or not there's any restoration or not. He always counts pages. This book in particular is a fatty. It has twice as many as we're used to seeing. But he's going to go ahead and check that out right now.
This particular comic has 16 wraps, which equals 32 pages. So we'll start counting from the back. 1, 2, and 16. At this point, we're at the center of the book, called the Centerfold, and we've confirmed that the back half of the book is complete. We'll now continue counting. 31 and 32. So now confirm that the book has all 32 pages and the interior is complete. And while I was counting the pages, I was also assessing page quality. These pages are particularly white. I notice a slight bit of tanning along the edge, slight bit of discoloration, but even so, given that this book is from 1942, these pages are about as white as it gets. So we'll give this book a classification of white pages. At the Centerfold, the first thing to check is disassembly, which is a red flag for restoration. I noticed based on how these prongs lie that it appears that the book was disassembled at one point.
Okay, so I want to talk about this for a moment real fast because in one of my other videos, somebody put a comment in about replacing staples from a comic book of the same era. And the likelihood of CGC catching that type of, restoration. And it is restoration. Here's the deal. These guys are pros. These guys know what to look for. And I'm telling you, you look inside your normal comic book and that hasn't had any restoration, you can tell things are the way they're supposed to be. The staples match. The holes, there aren't any additional holes. There aren't any additional tears. It's what you would expect out of a comic book. You start messing with it. What you're doing is you're increasing the margin of error. And if these guys see anything that seems out of place, anything that doesn't seem quite right, they're going to take a closer look. They're not going to be like, well, that looks weird, but anyways. No, they're going to be like, that looks weird. What's going on here? And if they see anything amiss, they're going to ding you with a restoration grade. So it's just, try to pull one over on CGC at your own risk. Personally, I would just leave books alone. You got a nice book, send it to CGC. Your book has some damage or has a problem, either send it to CGC exactly how it is or don't send it at all. I wouldn't take the risk. This restoration label to me is the kiss of death. But anyways, let's go ahead and continue.
I also see that the top edge of the Centerfold is worn and discolored, which is not present on the wraps behind it. This is an indication that the Centerfold was detached at one point.
Okay, so this is really interesting to me because I can't say why that Centerfold is discolored and what led him to immediately think, oh, it's been detached. To me, I have a comic book, okay, that I have that has the Centerfold detached. Well, that Centerfold is just right where it's supposed to be in the book. It's being stored in the exact same way. I can't see that it would experience any kind of discoloration that any other part of the book would experience. But here's the deal. Once again, Matt saw something that didn't line up for him. It was odd to him that the Centerfold had that discoloration and the rest of the book didn't. And he's like, he's a detective of comic books. He's trying to put the story together, and he does. He puts his information about the staples, he puts his information about the discoloration on the Centerfold, and he comes up with a determination that's probably pretty accurate. Like I said, I just wanted to point out that I can't say exactly why that Centerfold's discolored, but to him, it was indicative of some kind of issue with this book at some point. And it's just another piece of evidence for him that indicates that some form of restoration did take place.
I'm now going to check the back side of the centerfold. I notice that there are two spots at the staple areas where the paper seems to be stuck to each other. Upon close inspection, this appears to be glue, which was applied to reattach the centerfold at one point. After inspecting this side of the centerfold, I notice the same thing. The pages are stuck together in two spots close to the staples. Like the other side, this indicates that glue was placed here to reattach the centerfold. Based on CGC's restoration scale, the quantity of this glue is small. It's one small dot of glue at the bottom staple and the top staple, which would be slight in nature, and we would assign it a 1. As far as quality though, because glue is not archival and is considered amateur, we would give this a rating of C, and an overall rating of C1 for this repair to the centerfold.
Okay, so here's my 2 cents on this. Don't do amateur restoration. If you're going to restore a book, use professional restoration materials if you're going to do it yourself. Or have a professional restoration expert do it for you. And this is where having that sheet that I told you about earlier, that you can go onto CGC and click and download and just kind of keep in, a digital copy of somewhere to refer to from time to time. If you choose to do any restoration, do the professional restoration. Use the professional materials, because seeing that C, remember, we're going to go back to this in a little bit, but remember what they said. The grade is not an average, okay? The grade is not like, they don't take, like, if you have an A1 piece of restoration and a C5 piece of restoration, they're not going to average it out to a B2 or 3 or something like that. They're going to give you the lowest section from each a piece of restored material. So once you use some kind of unprofessional restoration material like glue, you've immediately put your book into the C category, or the lowest worst grade for the quality of the restoration. So once again, don't do restoration, but if you're going to, make sure you refer to the sheet that CGC provides for all of us, and make sure that you use professional restoration materials.
While checking the cover for restoration, the first thing I'm going to do is carefully run my thumb up and down the spine to check for any indication of glue, crustiness. I don't feel anything, but because the book was disassembled, it's important to also check the inside cover for any repairs along the spine. Upon close inspection, I've determined that there is no glue or repairs along the inside spine. The next step is to check the book for trimming. It's clear that the book has not been trimmed by examining all 3 edges. At first glance, it appears that the bottom edge of the back cover may have been trimmed because of the missing text along the edge. But this is actually a miswrap, a printing defect that is evidenced by the printer's line here at the top and the extra paper visible above it. Miswraps rarely affect the grade of a comic book.
Okay, so that's an important thing to keep in mind. As he says, miswraps rarely affect the grade of the comic book. One, he said rarely. So I wish I could know in which instances a miswrap could affect the grade of a comic book. I know maybe he's referring to the fact that a book with a miswrap is not going to get a 10.0 or a 9.9. Hopefully that's what he's referring to. Hopefully it's not any kind of grade adjustment for grades 9.8 or lower. And miswraps, they happen all the time. All the time. I try to pick books that have the best wraps possible, but they're just out there there's just so many of them. And I collect a lot of X-Men books, so I've seen a lot of X-Men books side to side, and I see ones that just have wraps where you're just like wondering what they were thinking. In fact, I have a copy of Giant Size X-Men #1, and it's a miswrap. Now, I actually prefer the miswrap on this book. But unfortunately, because of the miswrap, it's got little tears down at the bottom of the book. Well, those tears are part of the paper, and they were part of the manufacturing. The wrap is too high, and so it actually exposed those minor tears. If the wrap had been done 100% correctly, then those would have been trimmed off when they trimmed the book. But like I said, I personally prefer the miswrap on this book because I have seen so many miswraps on this book that are too low and cut off the bottom. They cut off like Wolverine's claws or just any part of the art, and I didn't want that. So I like the miswrap on my book because what it left was no part of the image cut off, even though it does have those little cuts at the bottom. You can barely see them when you're looking at the book, and ultimately it's not supposed to affect the grade. So I was fine with it personally. It's the copy I have and I love it, okay? Even with its flaws.
I'm now going to check the front cover for color touch. Now, Superman 14 often has color touch for two reasons. One, it's a popular book that's valuable, and two, it's a black cover, which are often color touched. I noticed at the top of the cover there's a sheen that's different from the gloss of the rest of the cover. I also noticed that it appears that there was a name written on this area of the cover and possibly erased, which lifted color, and color touch was applied to cover that erased area. This area of color touch is about 1/2 inch tall by 2 inches wide, which equals 1 square inch. According to CGC's restoration scale, 1 square inch equals a quantity of 2. I feel that the materials used in the color touch was acrylic or watercolor, which is professional by CGC standards, and thus would get an A rating, giving this color touch an overall rating of A2.
I look at the color touch on the front of this book, and it looks horrible to me. The little bit of glue that they used on the spine to reattach whatever they did there, you could barely tell that it's there. It's imperceptible for a lot. I mean, it is perceptible, but it's minor. This color touch on the front of this book, to me, it just screams alteration. It looks horrible to me, but it got such a significantly better grade than the glue did. Why? Because they used professional materials, because they used the watercolor or the acrylic that I think he mentioned. He was like, yes, acrylic or watercolor. He's like, hey, it's professional materials, man. That gets an A. And it's also 1 inch square. If he said it was 2 inches by 1/2 inch, so it was 1 inch square. It looks gigantic on that cover to me. But it's like, well, that amount is a 2. And it's like, oh man, wow. It just looks, I find it interesting that something on the cover that looks so poorly done gets a better grade, kind of. I mean, it got a lower grade in the number scale and a higher grade on the letter scale. But it just looks so horrible. Like, I'm like, that's a C5. That's horrible looking. But no, it's an A2 because it was done with professional materials. Just another reminder that if you're going to do this, do it with professional materials because it's going to end up giving you a restoration grade that is going to have a perception of being more favorable. Even if you look at the book and you can immediately tell, wow, look at that color touch that was done right there. Now, another point I want to make about color touch is oftentimes color touch is hard to determine. There are some instances where color touch is easy to determine. Someone uses a Sharpie to fill in a little black area. Well, that Sharpie is going to bleed through to the interior of a cover, for example. If you see spots on the interior of a book that looks like it's ink that has bled through from the cover, especially if it's near the spine and stuff like that, that's a pretty big red flag that it's probably got some colored touch going. I had a guy one time try to convince me at a comic book shop that it was just some kind of ink bleed through, and I was like, I don't think that that's what I'm looking at right here. So keep that in mind as well. A lot of people use black lights in order to check for color touch. The color touch will stand out under a black light. It behaves, the black light reacts to those elements, the original printed elements and the color touch elements differently and helps them stand out. Now, unless you're a hardcore comic book buyer, or if you're buying a really old book that you're spending a lot of money on, you probably don't already have a black light. But if you are buying an amazing, expensive old book in the raw that isn't already graded, you might consider getting like a black light pen or something like that so that you can double check it for color touch. Because the last thing you're ever going to want to do is spend full, retail dollars on a book, send it off to CGC thinking I got this sweet, sweet book, and have it come back to you and surprise you with a restored grade, because you will be in the negative financially immediately. And of course, that's what we're all trying to avoid by educating ourselves about restoration. We're trying to avoid that type of thing happening, but also under certain circumstances, you might want to make sure that you have the tools to detect restoration for yourself.
Now that I've finished the restoration check, it's time to combine all the restoration found together to determine the final restoration grade. I determined that the glue at the centerfold had a rating of C1, and the color touch on the front cover had a rating of A2. Combining those two together, we come up with a final restoration grade of C2.
Okay, so just again, a reminder, not an average. At first I thought that they would take an average grade for the final restoration grade, but it is not. They look at all the restoration elements from the book, and they take the lowest elements of those separate restoration grades to give you the final one that goes on the label. So that's why this book got a C2. It got the C because of the glue, and it got the 2 for the more than minor amount of color touch that was on the book. So something that you know when you're looking at the restoration grade, that is a total of the worst elements. Okay, let's continue.
Now it's time to assign the grade of this comic book. The cover's free of any creases or tears, but I do notice wear along the right edge and the bottom edge that break color. On the spine, both staples show some wear. It's determined that the bottom staple is detached from the front cover, which would normally lower the grade to 8.0 or 8.5.
Okay, so he has revealed right there that one detached staple one staple detached is going to take you to an 8.0 or an 8.5. That is pretty interesting and worth keeping in mind. You want your books to be intact, and if the staple is detached, that's not quite 100% intact. And I would say just starting off at an 8.0 or an 8.5 is not a great place to start. So you might want to consider that if you ever submit a book that has this type of defect.
But because of the extra missing paper at both the bottom and top staple, as well as staple tears, this, in conjunction with the edge wear, make the front cover about a 5.5.
Okay, so he says that the front cover is a 5.5. The detached staple was an 8.0 or an 8.5, but the tears and the missing paper, that took it all the way down to him to a 5.5. One thing that I'm learning from these videos in a lot of ways, and through my experience of trying to learn more about CGC grading, tears, missing pieces are deadly to the grading process. In fact, I've gotten to the point whereas if I'm buying a book out in the wild, in you know, a raw book, and it's not just purely a reader, which to me, I don't really see any of the books in my collection as pure readers. I want them all to be as nice as possible. If it has any tears or any missing pieces, it's immediately not for me. I am not interested. I could have, you know, I'm putting together a Chris Claremont X-Men run. I could have every single book in the run that I'm going for, and I have the last book that I need in my hand, and it's got a tear in it. No, I will keep looking. I am not going to buy that book because tears and missing pieces are deadly to the grade. So keep that in mind. If you're buying this really, you're buying your grail and you found it raw and you think this is really, really great, make sure you understand how deadly tears and missing pieces are to the grade when you're purchasing that book raw. Even if you're not even thinking about ever, you know, sending it to CGC, you need to know what the grade is, and tears and missing pieces are just destroy the grade. Okay, let's continue.
Assessing the back cover, I noticed significant wear along the spine that includes creasing, foxing, and tears at the staples. There's also wear across the top edge, such as creasing and minor staining. Tying all the defects together, with the front cover appearing 5.5 and the additional back cover wear, I arrive at a final grade of 5.0.
Whoa! Whoa! Now hold on a second. Did you see the back of that book? The back of that book was rough. There were some rough elements especially to the spine on the back of that book. But in his talking through of his grade, he took the grade from a 5.5 to a 5.0. The next step down, 1/2, you know, point, from a 5.5 to a 5.0, based off of the back of a book that was in rough shape. Now, I know that CGC weighs the front cover more heavily when they're grading than the defects on the front cover affect the grade more significantly than defects on the back cover. However, those defects on that back cover only reducing the grade 0.5 to me is really, really surprising. Now, it's very possible that the more defects the book has, the less the individual defects affect the total grade. It's not like it's like, okay, well, there's a little mark, okay, minus this. There's another mark, minus this. There's another mark, minus this. At one point, it becomes a general, this area is damaged, minus this. But it is just, this to me is just another reminder that if you have a book that is beautiful on the front and got some damage on the back, you might want to still consider grabbing that book or at least grading it for yourself at a higher grade, because you know that CGC is going to pay more attention to the front than they do to the back. The nicer the front is, the higher the grade. The worse the front is, the lower the grade, regardless of its relative damage on the back. Got it? I think I made that clear. Let's go ahead and finish up.
And there you have it. That's how we arrived at the 5.0 grade for the Superman 14.
White pages. That was the final determination with a C2 slight, moderate restoration grade. And I do love that they put the details of the restoration on the label.
If you enjoyed this video, make sure to give us a like. And if you want to see more videos like this, hit the subscribe button. And if you have any questions, leave them in the comment section below because we'll be answering questions in future videos. Thanks for watching and see you soon.
I highly recommend that you do what he just said. I highly recommend that you go to the CGC YouTube page, watch this video, just put it on and go into the other room for 8 minutes or something. But watch it, give it a view, give it a like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, leave a message, leave a comment telling him, hey Matt, great video, hope to see more of these. Because we need to encourage CGC to make more of these videos. It has been 2 months since they put out this video. I was really hoping we would get monthly videos like this from CGC. So do not let up on them. Definitely, definitely, definitely give them the support that they need and the encouragement that they need to continue making these videos, because these videos are way too valuable. There is some great little nuggets of information in these videos, in just the 2 that they've done so far. And the more of these videos that they make, the more transparency there will be with the CGC grading process, and the smarter, more capable, more confident submitters we will all become to CGC. And for all of that, all that confidence and knowledge is why I have been making these videos. It's why I make this Reacts video. It's why I make my other Test Your Comic Book Grading Skills videos, so that we can all become better, smarter, more confident submitters. I hope that this video helped you in some way, shape, or form in better understanding restoration assessment and grading over at CGC. If you learned even one thing, I ask you to please hit that like button. It helps me out, it encourages me, it tells YouTube that I'm doing good work, and it helps YouTube tell other people to come check me out. So hit that like button and let me know that you enjoyed the content. Also, down in the comments, if you have any information or thoughts or suggestions or tips or advice for people that are looking to learn more about restoration, please throw it down in the comments. Share your knowledge with the community. I only know so much, but I want to learn more. So not only do I want to hear from you because I want to learn what you have to tell me, but I want that information to become available to everybody who could possibly watch this video. I respond basically to every single comment that I get because I appreciate them so much. So once again, if you have any thoughts about this video in general or specifically on restoration or comic book grading, please feel free to share them down in the comments. Finally, if this is a video of mine that you stumbled across for any reason, you got here towards the end, thank you so much for watching the video. I highly recommend and invite you to subscribe by hitting the subscribe guy right here and hitting the notification bell so that you're informed when I put out other videos like this, and my Test Your Comic Book Grading Skill videos and my Just One Book videos. As always, thank you so much for watching this video. I'll see you in the next one.